Tonight at 10, King Charles and his 3 siblings hold a vigil at their late mother's coffin as she lies in state in Westminster Hall. They stood in silence as members of the public filed past to pay their own respects. Thousands queued to see the Queen, including the former England captain David Beckham. Everyone was moved by their experience.
I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Fantastic.
I've never been so humbled. I don't really have the words to describe how I feel. She is the only Queen I've ever known.
And this is the scene right now, with people continuing to queue despite an onset of colder weather tonight and waiting times of almost 20 hours. Earlier, the King ended his tour of the UK in Cardiff, addressing members of the Welsh Parliament and greeting crowds who came to welcome him.
I take up my new duties with immense gratitude for the privilege of having been able to serve as Prince of Wales.
We'll bring you details of the events taking place over the weekend, leading up to the Queen's state funeral on Monday. Also on the programme, Ukraine says hundreds of graves have been found outside Izium, a city that was recently regained from Russian forces.
It's only now, after the Russians have been pushed out, that the authorities can really investigate and can establish how many victims they left behind.
As retail sales in the UK dip sharply, the pound falls to a 37-year low against the US dollar. And the Women's Super League in England gets underway, with clubs enjoying record ticket sales off the back of the Lionesses' success in the Euros.
And stay with us here on BBC News, where we will bring you continuing coverage of events plus analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Good evening. The Queen's 4 children, led by King Charles, have held a vigil at Westminster Hall, standing in silence around their late mother's coffin, while members of the public filed past quietly to pay their respects. Earlier, the queue to see the Queen lying in state reopened after a pause of several hours. But mourners are being warned of a long wait of almost 20 hours, and the weather overnight is expected to be cold. The King and the Queen Consort Camilla concluded their UK tour earlier in the day in Wales, where the King addressed the Senedd in both English and Welsh. We'll have more on that later in the programme. But first, here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
They are 4 people with a unique bond. A king, a princess and 2 princes, to whom she was first and foremost a mother, as well as their queen. Charles, Anne, Edward and Andrew entered Westminster Hall and approached the catafalque. All of them, including Andrew, were in uniform. The King took his place at the head of the coffin, the Duke of York at the foot, the Princess Royal on one of the flanks, the Earl of Wessex on the other. They stood with their heads bowed. Watching, members of the extended royal family, though not Princes William and Harry. They, with the Queen's other grandchildren, will mount a vigil tomorrow evening. The vigil of the sons and daughter lasted for a little less than 15 minutes, a personal tribute on a very public stage. And all the while, the long lines of spectators continued to file past. For them, there'd been an added reward.
I think the strength that it took the King and his siblings and standing there in front of so many members of the public was really overwhelming and breathtaking, really.
Yeah, so strong. Those children are so strong.
On a busy day for the new King, an important speech about diversity and faith. He told faith leaders at Buckingham Palace that he would be sovereign of all communities.
society can only thrive through a clear collective commitment to those vital principles of freedom of conscience, generosity of spirit, and care for others, which are, to me, the essence of our nationhood. I am determined as King to preserve and promote those principles across all communities and for all beliefs with all my heart.
And while the new king sets the tone for his reign, those who served the Queen for many years are reflecting on the public reaction to her death.
Extraordinarily humbling, I think, is the first word that comes to mind. It's been so beautifully organised, this ability for thousands of people to pay this tribute. And I do think that that is an essential part of this 10-day mourning period, this contact between us, the people, and our departed Queen.
On Monday, the state funeral will take place when the Queen's coffin will be borne to Westminster Abbey on a gun carriage.
I think it'll be hugely important. It will be the culmination of this long period. It will be, I believe, intensely moving, deeply solemn, but a moment, I think, of a real moment of national catharsis.
It isn't just Britain which is marking the Queen's passing. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been meeting troops from different Commonwealth countries who will be taking part in the state funeral. A solemn day which will mark the end of a long reign. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, thousands of people are still queuing to see the Queen lying in state. Let's take a look now at the latest pictures from inside Westminster Hall. As you can see, many members of the public filing through quietly to pay their respects and to say a final farewell. Well, the queue, which they have just left, runs back from Lambeth Bridge along the Thames through to Southwark Park, and it was paused earlier after the park, which is over 4.5 miles away from Westminster, reached capacity. It opened again earlier this evening, but people are being warned that they should expect to wait for almost 20 hours. The accessible queue has been closed tonight and will reopen tomorrow at midday. Angus Crawford reports.
Step by step, yard by yard, and mile by mile, still they come in their thousands. A queue so long it's apparently visible from space. Here, the very start, in Southwark Park.
Guys, sorry, we're closed now.
So many at one point the gates were closed to stop overcrowding.
Yeah, so we've been told to stop everyone.
Even that didn't put people off.
We've come from Birmingham and our plans are quite simply to stay here until the gates open.
We're tough, we're not worried about it. We would, we want to pay our respects. Yeah, we're going to manage.
Opening again soon after, the flow carefully regulated. Official advice, please don't come yet. But this is a tale of two queues. Here for disabled people and those with mobility issues, now closed until tomorrow.
Thank you for bearing with us. I know it's frustrating.
The guidance once more, please delay your visit. Pat Halpin has been a volunteer for 50 years.
I've never seen anything like this. We've planned this for a long time. You know, we are working with numerous agencies across, so you're in safe hands, you're in good hands.
By late afternoon, they treated more than 100 people for mostly minor ailments. Day turns to night. The temperatures drop, but the stream of people flows on. This line snakes hundreds of metres around the park, but for those who've been lucky enough to get this far, they've been warned that they may not get to Westminster Hall until at least lunchtime tomorrow.
She served my country for 70 years. I mean, what's 2 days of my time at most?
You know, I think it's, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, isn't it? It's something that I can tell my kids, my grandkids.
Look at everybody. Everybody's come together to do
Everyone
this.
is coming from all over the world, not even from Commonwealth, but from other countries. She was just an icon for everybody.
The working week done, the line can only grow. A moment in history no one here is prepared to miss. Angus Crawford, BBC News.
Let's go over now to our correspondent Layla Nathu, who's in Southwark Park, which is the start of the queue. Layla.
Rita, the temperature has dropped here in Southwark Park, but there is a continuous stream of people filing into the park, zigzagging along and being shepherded through and out of the other side. The process is well managed. There's a bit more of a police presence here tonight, and the atmosphere is very upbeat. Spirits are high. There's a lot of chatter in the queue. Many people I spoke to tonight felt they simply had to come and weren't really sure what lay ahead. They felt they came at the first opportunity at the end of the working week. Now, two people who have made that journey and come along to the queue tonight are joining us now. We've got Jan Perks and her daughter Megan Hare. Jan and Megan, thanks for joining us. What made you come for the night shift?
Yes, we felt that we had to come. We'd said right from the beginning that we wanted to come. We decided after work today, and then obviously all the news about the queue being closed, but we made the decision just to come up.
We left home not knowing whether the queue was open or not, but decided it was the right thing for us to come up tonight because it's our first opportunity to be here.
And what are you expecting when you get to the other side?
I just think it's going to be a very moving moment, and definitely worth the wait.
Incredibly emotional, I can imagine.
Jan, Megan, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck for the night ahead.
Thank you.
Well, the official guidance remains for people to be prepared for a 22-hour wait and for cold temperatures overnight. But certainly for Jan, Megan, everyone here, the wait will be worth it.
Layla, many thanks. During the day, thousands waited patiently to be allowed in, including David Beckham, who had spent the night queuing to pay his respects. Our correspondent Chichi Uzundu is at the front of the queue. Chichi.
Yes, Rita, and you can see the people behind me are just the first batch of people coming in from Southwark Park. For them, this is the moment. This is what they've been waiting for. The goal is to see the Queen lying in state, but they've told us time and time again that that's not just the only experience that they're experiencing here during this time. They're experiencing meeting new people, making new friends, and of course doing that very quintessentially British thing, joining a very long queue. All day they came, hour after hour, mile after mile. Night and day, the queue continues.
Not long now, sun's out, keep smiling.
Tiring and arduous, everyone had their own way of coping, including David Beckham.
We're eating Pringles, we're eating sherbet lemons, we're eating sandwiches, having coffee, so donuts.
Yeah.
We all got here, 12 hours.
12 hours. And how's it been on the knees? Because we've seen you sort
Knees
of
are okay for the back. Something like this today is meant to be shared together. I grew up in a family that were all royalists. I think back to my grandparents, because if my grandparents were alive, they would have been here. So it's nice to be here to celebrate with everybody, the life of Her Majesty and the legacy that she's left.
It's just a table of snacks and sugar to keep you going.
This is a journey hundreds of thousands will make, past famous landmarks, documenting their experience any way they can.
I'm in awe of the people in this queue, and I thought, well, I'd like to come down and capture them rather than landmarks and pomp and ceremony, because that's a real story for me.
afterwards. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Among those people, we met Abigail and her new friends.
We've been with a very good crowd, haven't we?
We've been an excellent crowd, and particularly when we were standing still for about 2 hours, weren't we, opposite St Paul's. We thought we were never going to move on, but we kept going.
You got up at 4 a.m.
But we got up at 3 and arrived at 4.
We're still smiling. Still smiling, yes.
But for Roy, it's fewer smiles and more contemplation. Between himself and his sons, they have 79 years of active service and counting. Have you given any thought to how you're going to feel once you enter the hall?
I try not to think about it at the moment through fear of getting overwhelmed. But I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what I don't know at the moment.
I've shed so many tears in the last few days. I'll be a blubbering wreck, I know that.
It was amazing. It was beautiful. The sun was streaming in. It was very poignant, obviously.
Oh yes, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Fantastic.
Truly a surreal moment. To file past the only monarch you've known, it breaks my heart.
I've never been so humbled. I don't really have the words to describe how I feel. She is the only queen I've ever known, and the only queen I've ever loved.
I'm so thankful that I was able to make it, yeah, and it was worth it. I'd do it again, and I would spend 20 hours in a queue if I had to, because she's worth it.
And that's the thing, Rita, a lot of people are echoing Roy's words, saying they would spend 20 hours in the queue just to walk past the Queen in the coffin. But temperatures have dropped and it is really cold. So the only words of advice we're hearing from people now is if you do plan to join the queue, dress warm, pack some snacks and wear some very comfortable shoes.
Good advice. Many thanks. Chichi Uzundu reporting there. Well, let's take a look once again at the latest pictures now from inside Westminster Hall, where people are filing past to see the Queen lying in state. And let's take a look now also at the latest queue lengths outside. The website is now showing that the queue is 19.5 hours long, so quite a lengthy wait for anybody who wants to join that queue. And do remember that if you can't get to London but you want to pay your respects, the BBC is offering a continuous 24-hour view of the Queen's lying in state. The service is available on the BBC homepage, the BBC News website and app, the iPlayer, on BBC Parliament and the red button. Earlier today, King Charles made his first official visit to Wales, bringing to a conclusion his tour of the 4 UK home nations since becoming monarch. The King attended a service of prayer and reflection for the late Queen at Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff. The King and the Queen Consort also visited the Senedd, where he responded to a motion of condolence in both English and Welsh, and then headed to Cardiff Castle, where large crowds of well-wishers lined the streets to cheer for the royal couple, and some presented them with gifts and with flowers. Our special correspondent Alan Little has been watching the day's events and is at Cardiff Castle for us now. Alan.
Well, Rita, it's been a hectic schedule, a hectic few days for the King and the Queen Consort. The new King has spent the first week of his reign reaching out to hug the devolved nations of the United Kingdom very close. This last visit of the tour to the country whose title, he said, he'd been proud to carry for more than half a century, the title of Prince of Wales, a title that he now passes to his own heir. Expressions of affection for the devolved nations, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, have been a hallmark of this tour, but so too have been gestures and statements of respect for the distinctive traditions and character of those nations. The same was true of the reign of his mother, the late Queen. And I think it says much about the kind of unifying reign that the new King aspires to.
There is something special about this final leg of his tour of the nations. It has the character of a homecoming. His relationship with Wales is intimate. As a student, he studied the Welsh language and spoke Welsh at his investiture as Prince of Wales in 1969. Many of the people he met today have known him for years. Llandaff Cathedral was rebuilt after being bombed in the Cardiff Blitz. It connects us and the royal family to the great shared British experience of the Second World War. Queen Elizabeth's visit here in 1960 marked its restoration, a symbol of the long recovery from war and its aftermath that characterised the early years of her reign. Here, the King and Queen Consort attended a service of prayer and reflection for her life.
A nawr o arglwydd fy niw, gwnaethos dy was yn frenin, yn llef yn had Dafydd, a minnau'n llanc, ifanc, dibrofiad.
The First Minister Mark Drakeford read from the first book of Kings, which includes the verse, "And now, O my Lord, you have made your servant king." Welsh was confirmed as an official language here only in 2011. It is strengthening in this age of devolved government. The bilingualism of this service, another celebration of the distinctiveness of Wales within the UK.
As Wales gains an even stronger sense of nationhood and our place within the world, we should still remember that shared traditions count.
Outside the cathedral, there was another of those moments he has seemed this week to relish most. This is a king who wants to be visible and to engage directly with the people. The future of the Union has been at the heart of this first week of his reign.
With the ceremony.
For at every turn, the king has embraced the distinctive traditions by which the nations of his kingdom express their identities.
The biggest danger to the Union is arrogance around its continuation. I suspect the monarchy has got perhaps even greater sensitivity than politicians to this, because there's a real sense of understanding that the cultural and political heritages of each of the nations is very different. And certainly the Queen reflected that in her remarks when she was opening the National Assembly and then the Senedd, and I would expect King Charles to do the same.
And he did. On the floor of the Senedd, he replied to a motion of condolence in both languages.
Through all the years of her reign, the land of Wales could not have been closer to my mother's heart. Roedd lle arbennig I Gymru yn uchelon. I know she took immense pride in your many great achievements, even as she also felt with you deeply in time of sorrow. It must surely be counted the greatest privilege to belong to a land that could inspire such devotion. I am resolved to honour that selfless example in the spirit of the words by which I have always tried to live my own life. Ich dien, I serve.
Cardiff Castle, where this first tour of the new king's reign ended, dates from the time of William the Conqueror, a reminder in medieval architecture of the long continuities that the monarchy is rooted in. Here, in the afternoon sunshine, the king greeted thousands who'd come to see him. It was a relaxed end to an otherwise energetic first week, a week in which it has been easy to forget that the king is also leading his family through a period of intense private sorrow, a sorrow on which the eyes of the world intrude. On Monday, he will lay his mother to rest and lead the country in mourning a monarch who had come to embody much of the character of Britain itself, its shared history, its shared identity.
Well, that title, Prince of Wales, is not universally loved or admired here. It was originally held by indigenous Welsh rulers and was taken by the English King Edward I for his own son and heir. So for Welsh nationalists and some others, it carries in it the memory of the conquest and subjugation of Wales by the English crown. As our Wales correspondent Howell Griffith reports, Wales remains divided over its own relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom and with its attitude to the monarchy itself.
Filled with fervour, in allegiance or in anger, each came with their own reason to witness a piece of history. The cheers sang out alongside the jeers most wanted to welcome a man who, for the first time, came to Wales as monarch. They also wanted to remember his mother.
Fantastic. How could we miss this occasion? Very, very special to see the King and the Queen concert, and what a very sad but a very emotional week we've had.
Well, it's a really important time really for us and for the King, because, you know, to pay our respect. If we can't go to London, obviously we can come here.
Oh, I actually came here because of my son, because his name is Charles, so he really wants to see the King.
Yeah, proud Welshman, but a royalist as well, obviously.
And the two things can go together?
Yeah, definitely, I think, without doubt, yeah.
But others do have their doubts and held a silent protest, respecting the Queen's passing, but resisting what's followed.
I don't believe that someone should be born into a position of power to rule over us. I don't think perhaps we would have been out today had the new king not said about putting his son into the position of the Prince of Wales, but he did that very soon after the death of the Queen, and therefore we felt compelled to come here today to show that we have a different view and that we want that to be shown as well.
University College, Aberystwyth, where, to the relief of the nation, Prince Charles was given a warm and very friendly welcome.
Those tensions have brewed for decades. In 1969, ahead of his investiture, Charles came to Aberystwyth for a crash course in Welsh. An attempt to win over a nation sceptical of having an English Prince of Wales. It didn't placate the protesters.
Today may not have come with quite the same pomp and pageantry as the investiture in 1969, but it has shone a spotlight on the relationship between Wales and the House of Windsor and where it goes from here.
The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, is an avowed Republican, but also determined to remain diplomatic.
Long term, should Wales retain a monarchy?
Well, I'm talking to you as the First Minister.
But your personal view?
Oh, well, I'm not here to give you my personal view. I'm here as the First Minister. And I think, representing what I believe to be the views of contemporary Wales, I think people in Wales do think that there is a part that the monarchy can play here in Wales, part of what binds the United Kingdom together, and I think people in Wales would look to see that continue.
For some, the politics are secondary to the personal. Beryl came clutching a card she'd received from Balmoral just 2 days before Queen Elizabeth's death.
I felt so sorry for Charles this last week, and, you know, I wish him all the best. You know, I saw a different side to Charles this week, and I really think he'll make a good king.
The weeks and months ahead will show how he hopes to define that role and whether the whole of Wales wants to embrace him. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Cardiff.
Well, the King has done two things simultaneously this week that reveal something about the kind of monarch he seeks to be. First, he's led the country in the ritualising of its sorrow, and that sorrow has been expressed quietly in the streets as people gathered to watch the Queen's coffin pass by on its route, and those who are queuing tonight in London and who queued earlier in the week in Edinburgh to file past the coffin as it lay in rest and lay in state. It's also been expressed by leading politicians in the warmest of words spoken and in memories evoked, even by those political leaders who seek to take their countries out of the United Kingdom altogether. And that's been the second striking thing that he's done this week. He's extended a hand to the devolved nations of the United Kingdom. He repeatedly expressed his late mother's and his own affection for those nations, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and his respect for the distinctiveness of their traditions, their values and their institutions, to signal his understanding of the nature of the United Kingdom, the kingdom he inherits as a union state, a voluntary partnership of nations. And in that, as in much else, he is following what he called in Northern Ireland the shining example of his mother. We've also watched that central tenet of constitutional monarchy, the smooth passage of the crown from mother to son, played out in public. So alongside the sense of loss, there is also the public expectation of continuity. Queen Elizabeth came to embody a certain conception of Britain itself, a shared history and identity. What will endure of that when this period of mourning is over and in the years that lie ahead? Well, the King has given us this week, I think, a sense of how he intends to fill the space in the country's life and the country's affections that the loss of his mother leaves behind. Reeta.
Alan, thank you. Our special correspondent, Alan Little, there. Now to the day's other main news. And Ukraine's President Zelensky has accused Russia of committing war crimes in territory recently retaken by Ukrainian forces in the northeast of the country. Officials say that they found more than 400 graves containing civilians and around 20 soldiers who are said to have had their hands bound. They were discovered in the city of Izium, which Russian forces captured in April. Ukraine says the bodies will be exhumed and sent for forensic examination. Izium is among the areas back in Ukrainian hands after significant territorial gains in recent days, although heavy fighting is continuing in the areas shown in circles here. Our correspondent Orla Guerin has sent this report from Izium, and it contains some distressing images.
Under the pine trees of Izium, a war crimes investigation. This burial site has more than 400 graves, now being exhumed, the earth starting to give up its secrets. But the prosecutor here already claiming that one way or another, Russia killed virtually all of the dead. According to our data, almost everyone died because of Russian soldiers, says Alexander Filchakov. Some were killed, some were tortured, some were hit in Russian air and artillery strikes. He says the very first grave they opened contained the body of a civilian with a rope around his neck. Almost all the dead here are said to be civilians, women and children among them. But a senior official told us there was one mass grave with more than 20 soldiers. Some had their hands bound and bore signs of torture. For those at the scene, it was hard to take. This is a distressing sight, but Ukraine is determined that the world should see it. Graves are being opened here one by one. It's only now, after the Russians have been pushed out, that the authorities can really investigate and can establish how many victims they left behind. They were buried here in makeshift graves, many marked only with a number. Among them, a 65-year-old called Ludmila, who was killed in March in heavy Russian shelling. Her husband Grigory tells me then he had to bury her in the yard. She was brought here in August. Now her remains will be disturbed again. She was beloved, he says. We had no children. God didn't give us that gift, but we were in love. As the graves were exhumed, security forces were still eliminating threats with controlled detonations of Russian mines. Maxim came to the burial site to tell his story and show the marks on his wrists and ankles where he was shackled. He says he was held by the Russians for a week earlier this month and tortured with electric shocks. They connected wires, he tells me. You start shaking and trying to set yourself free. I fell from my chair. It was very painful. I asked my cellmates how long I was gone. They said 40 minutes. I think after 15 or 20 minutes, you pass out. As the day wore on, workers from the emergency services were drained by their labours. But they expect to be digging at more sites like this in other areas recently taken back from the Russians. Orla Gearan, BBC News, Izium.
Well, joining me now is our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Jeremy, some disturbing material there, but do we really know what has happened?
Well, we know what they've been telling reporters there, like Orla, that they've found some bodies that look as if they had been badly treated. You know, more awful tragedy in Ukraine, but is it war crimes? Well, you don't really know that until there's been a proper investigation. In previous wars, there were big forensic operations opening these graves to try and really treat them like a crime scene, to try and find out what happened, and full examinations of the corpses. And certainly over the years, the one thing I'd say about that is that you saw those lines of crosses. Now, over the years as a journalist, I've seen quite a few massacres in places, and it's quite rare that they would bury people who were killed illegally, unlawfully, in individual graves like that and keep a record. Generally speaking, what they probably do is dig a pit and push them in.
Well, this discovery was made in territory that was taken back from the Russians in recent days. We can see it there on the screen over in the east. Just remind us how important Izium is and why it's significant.
Yeah, that little area, sort of purpley colour up there on the map, it's important because it's strategically towards the place where the Russians in red still control it, and they would bring supplies through there, which clearly they can't do now. So it's working on a couple of different levels, the importance of this. First of all, on the battlefield, an extraordinary breakthrough for the Ukrainians, may even turn the tide of the war. It's too soon to say that. Also a reminder that the Russian army has really serious problems in terms of morale, in terms of command and control, in terms of intelligence, in terms of firepower. Even there, those guys apparently were not well armed. So it works on a wider level too, though, because this is something that President Putin has to try and explain. And he's been at this summit, a regional summit in Uzbekistan, and he's actually stood up and said, well, yes, I appreciate that you, the Chinese, have some misgivings about that. They're meant to be his best ally. Big contrast there with Ukraine. Their best ally, the United States, is sending them about $1 billion worth of equipment per week, and they're making it tell. Meanwhile, the Chinese president is not even mentioning Ukraine in his speech. So I think maybe it could be that these countries, like individuals, they want to back the winner. And maybe to start with, they thought that they were in terms of President Putin and Ukraine. But now he's increasingly under a lot of pressure, criticism at home as well of the war effort. And so they're thinking, wait a minute, do we want to be associated with this?
OK. Jeremy, thank you very much. Jeremy Bowen. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making the news today. 2 police officers are being treated in hospital after they were stabbed in central London early this morning. The suspect, who is also in hospital, has been arrested. The stabbing took place near Leicester Square, and police say it is not related to the Queen's death or terror-related. A former BBC radio presenter who was found guilty of stalking 4 people, including the broadcaster Jeremy Vine, has been jailed for 5.5 years. Alex Belfield stalked his victims by harassing them online. Train drivers are set to stage more strikes in October as part of a long-running dispute over pay, the BBC understands. Drivers at 12 train companies are expected to strike on the 1st and 5th of October. The train drivers' union ASLEF has not commented on the proposed industrial action out of respect ahead of the Queen's state funeral. Friends and colleagues of the former BBC broadcaster Bill Turnbull have paid tribute to him at his funeral service in Suffolk. Bill, who hosted BBC Breakfast for 15 years and was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2018, died in August, aged 66. The pound has fallen to a new 37-year low against the US dollar after figures showed UK retail sales fell sharply in August as the rise in the cost of living continued to hit households. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson is here with the details. Emma.
Thanks, Rita. Well, today's retail figures are fairly dismal and a sign of how inflation is eating into household budgets. Retail sales volumes, that's the quantity of goods bought, fell by 1.6% in August compared with the previous month. This figure is 3 times worse than had been expected and the biggest fall so far this year. And it happened across every main category, from petrol stations and supermarkets to clothing, furniture and department stores, as well as online. With soaring prices, consumers are buying less and focusing more on everyday essentials. The figures have heightened fears that the economy is already in or heading for a recession, prompting a further fall in the pound. Now, you can see with this graph how much pressure sterling's been under this year. It's been falling against the dollar. So have most major currencies. That's mainly because the dollar has surged in value. But deeper concerns about the UK economy are also worrying investors. Today, the pound dropped by more than 1% to just $1.13. That's the lowest level since 1985, although it has recovered slightly. The pressure is now on for policymakers, from the Bank of England and its decision on interest rates next Thursday to the new Chancellor's mini-budget the day after, when more details are expected on the government's new energy support package, as well as Liz Truss's promised tax cuts, which she hopes will get the tills ringing. Rita.
Thank you, Emma. Now, after all football was postponed last weekend following the death of the Queen, tonight saw the start of the delayed Women's Super League in England. It's hoped that the new domestic season will build on the success of the Lionesses in the summer at what could be a pivotal point in the women's game. Here's our sports reporter, Joe Curry.
And now we're off and underway.
The WSL returning for a new season. Arsenal hosting Brighton on a Friday night wasn't intended to be the opening match.
It's one up, just too much on it.
But in front of a sellout crowd of 3,000, last year's runners-up Arsenal got their campaign off to a 4-0 winning start, which included a brace from Beth Mead.
Mead, a must reverse ball for Mead! 3-0 Arsenal! Arsenal might have a fourth. It comes back for Mead, lovely turn.
And fans who came to watch tonight said their hopes for the new season were high.
I've heard that tonight it's already sold out, so it's great to see more fans getting involved and coming to games. There's going to be quite a bit of competition compared to previous seasons. I think it might be a bit closer with the title race and everything.
I'm really excited because England have won the Euro, so I think it's a great opportunity to embrace the Women's Super League.
England, European champions!
This summer, England lit up the nation when they were crowned European champions at Wembley. The players were then hoping to bring some of that magic to this year's domestic league. It had been due to begin when Spurs hosted Manchester United at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium last Saturday. The death of the Queen, however, meant the start of the season was postponed, with huge implications. Instead, the season started here at Boreham Wood, and whilst this game wasn't televised, the players, it seems, knows it's a moment that needs to be seized.
We have a constant responsibility that we're aware of to grow the game. I don't know if we'll ever stop. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we sort of think, OK, we're good now and we can just really enjoy the football. We always want more, we always want better for the girls that are coming behind us, almost to pay respect to those that have come before as well, like that what they did has led us to this moment.
The Euros have been described as a game-changing moment for the sport, with record ticket sales already being recorded for this season. The challenge now, though, is how do clubs harness the support?
We need to manage the growth. Just throwing money at it isn't going to do it. It needs to be developmentally managed. So what we don't want to go is go up really quickly and then burst and come down again. We want to go up really carefully and steadily. So I'm really optimistic we can do that.
While the launch of the WSL's new season has no doubt been impacted by the postponements, it's hoped that fans new and old will turn out for what should be a special weekend, albeit later than planned. Joe Curry, BBC News.
Let's return now to our coverage of the Queen's death and bring you up to date with the latest on what will be happening over the weekend. Tomorrow evening, the Queen's grandchildren, including the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex, will take part in a vigil beside the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall. A 1-minute silence to reflect on the life and legacy of the Queen will be held across the UK on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. That is the night before the Queen's funeral. On Monday, the state funeral for the Queen will take place at Westminster Abbey, with the service starting at 11 o'clock. A 2-minute silence will be held as the service ends just before noon. The route for the Queen's funeral procession to Windsor from London was revealed today. The procession will travel from Wellington Arch in central London, past Heathrow Airport, before arriving at Windsor Castle. The final part of the procession up Windsor's famous Long Walk is expected to be done on foot. A committal service will then take place at 4 o'clock in St George's Chapel before the Queen is buried alongside the Duke of Edinburgh in a private burial service at 7:30. Well, around 500 heads of state, dignitaries and members of royal families from around the world will be attending the Queen's funeral at Westminster Abbey. It'll be one of the biggest security and logistical challenges that the country has ever seen, as our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports.
This ancient abbey may be the stage for an historic state funeral on Monday, but it will also play host to an extraordinary assembly of world leaders. Hundreds of foreign dignitaries come to mourn the Queen, but also attend a diplomatic gathering, the like of which not seen for decades. They'll have a chance to attend the lying in state at Westminster Hall. This afternoon, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, was among the first foreign leaders to pay their respects. And on Sunday, they'll go to a reception with the King at Buckingham Palace. They'll also be able to sign a book of condolence down the road at Lancaster House. All this is going to require a huge amount of security.
Oh, it's just enormous. I think the scale of those involved in the full ceremonial is into the thousands. In addition to everything that's happening in the funeral, we've got world leaders coming from all over the world who, of course, need to be sure of their own protection, and we need to make sure that this is an enormous event that can pass off safely and securely.
But before going to Westminster Abbey on Monday, these global statesmen and women will have to pay a perhaps unexpected visit to the Royal Hospital Chelsea, famous for its pensioners and flower show. The Royal Hospital here will become something of an upmarket park and ride. Kings and queens, heads of state and government will arrive here on Monday morning amid tight security, and then they'll do something they probably don't do very often. They'll take the bus. Buses perhaps a bit like this one. There are just too many VIPs coming for each to take their own cars. So a venerable figure such as the Emperor of Japan might find himself sitting on the bus alongside a mere politician or diplomat.
They are here principally to honour the Queen, not to talk to each other, and so they are more pliable. They will do the bidding of the Foreign Office protocol perhaps more happily than if this had been a summit. But yes, who sits next to whom, who's talking to whom will be something on the minds of everybody there.
Of course, there'll be exceptions. The President of the United States doesn't take the bus, he takes the Beast, an armoured car he used this week as he visited the British Embassy in Washington. Not everyone's coming. President Putin's not invited because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and President Xi of China will probably send his deputy. But some MPs don't want even him to come because of China's human rights abuses. So politics may follow the politicians into the Abbey, but once inside, the focus will turn inevitably to the woman they've come to mourn. James Landale, BBC News.
In a moment, we'll get the latest on the transport situation over the weekend with our correspondent Katie Austin. But first to our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford, who's at New Scotland Yard. And Daniel, as we've heard, a huge security operation underway.
Yes, Rita. On Monday, the Metropolitan Police will deploy more officers on the streets of London than they've ever deployed before, and within that there's going to be the biggest VIP protection operation they've ever mounted, because over the weekend they've got an emperor, several kings and queens and multiple princes, presidents and prime ministers all gathering and then coming together in one place on Monday morning in Westminster Abbey. The number of police officers on the streets of London on Monday is going to be bigger than the entire workforce of the second biggest police force in England, West Midlands Police. And the Metropolitan Metropolitan Police is being boosted by well over 2,000 officers coming in from forces outside London as a kind of national mobilisation. I've seen officers from Scotland, from Wales, from Northern Ireland. Just over there tonight there's a van parked from Durham Constabulary, one from North Yorkshire Constabulary has just left. It is a huge national mobilisation of officers. Officers will be lining the entire length of the ceremonial route on Monday through central London. Specialists will be poring over the CCTV images coming back of the crowds. Other officers will be mingling with the crowds, looking for any telltale changes of behaviour. There'll be firearms officers on rooftops, and of course there'll be police officers manning road closures and patrolling the River Thames. Every lamppost within the ceremonial area is currently being opened, checked for any hidden explosive device, and then closed again and sealed. Of course, none of this is new. It has all been done before, but it's never been done before on this kind of scale. And in fact, leaders here at Scotland Yard aren't sure that they're ever going to mount a security operation like this ever again.
And Katie, you're inside Waterloo Station for us. What are we expecting over the coming days?
Well, the pressure on London's transport network is expected to grow over the weekend and on Monday, the day of that state funeral. London's Transport Commissioner told me today the biggest transport challenge is yet to come, with potentially 1 million people coming into central London. But he said a lot of preparation and planning has been done to manage the situation with extra services and staff where possible. One particular pressure point could be on Monday afternoon and evening after that day's events have finished, and transport bosses are encouraging people to think about delaying their journeys home so that too long queues don't build up at tube stations and at rail stations. When it comes to trains, some extra services are being put on, including during the night, and major London stations like this one will be open 24 hours a day. Some empty passenger trains are even being used as waiting areas in some places. Now, other transport changes happening on Monday include London Victoria Coach Station will be closed because of the road closures that have to be in place, and Heathrow Airport is altering 15% of its entire daily schedule. It says as a mark of respect to keep the skies quiet over London and over Windsor at key moments during the day, and that does mean some flights have been cancelled.
Katie, thank you. Katie Austin reporting, and thanks to Daniel Sanford. Queen Elizabeth had a special relationship with South Africa, a country she visited as a princess on her first trip to Africa. She returned twice as Queen, witnessing huge change over more than half a century. Some South Africans have quietly mourned the Queen's death, remembering in particular her friendly relations with Nelson Mandela after the overthrow of white majority rule. But others point less fondly to the enduring legacy of Britain's empire in Africa. Andrew Harding reports now from Cape Town.
It's 1947 and a converted warship is taking the royal family to the southern tip of Britain's vast African empire.
Sunshine, good food, everything that goes to make the perfect holiday.
On board, in holiday spirits, 2 princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret. But once ashore in Cape Town, Elizabeth turns 21 and reflects earnestly on her future role as Queen.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Amid the crowds at her birthday party that night, a black guest, a young ballet dancer, now 94 years old.
I felt absolutely enraptured, honoured, overwhelmed to see her on her 21st birthday.
Johar Mossaval would later dance at the Queen's coronation.
I danced a solo for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
The first black dancer in the Royal Ballet
in the world, in the Royal Ballet, yes.
The 1947 Royal Tour was declared a success. White crowds lining the streets of colonial Cape Town.
These events in South Africa are being watched by the whole world. They will silence many voices which have been all too ready to say that the day of the British Empire is over.
But in truth, that global empire was already crumbling.
Soon after that royal visit, South Africa would lurch away from the Crown and the Commonwealth. A white minority government came to power and introduced a system of apartheid designed to crush the black majority. It would be half a century before Queen Elizabeth would return here to Cape Town.
When she did return in 1995, she was met by South Africa's most famous prisoner, now democratically elected president, Nelson Mandela.
Now, under your wise and generous leadership, South Africa is emerging onto the world stage.
The two regal figures were soon on first-name terms.
People would say, how can you say Elizabeth to the Queen? And Mandela would say, but she calls me Nelson, so what's wrong with my calling her Elizabeth?
Very much a relationship of equals.
Very much
unusual.
So. Very unusual.
Significantly, and despite security concerns, the Queen insisted on visiting poor and often violent black townships, attracting curious, enthusiastic crowds.
So it meant a lot to people here.
It meant a lot, yeah.
She came to a black township.
She came to the black township, yeah.
And wasn't scared?
She was not scared. She was not scared, yeah.
But in the same township today, many remain trapped in poverty.
Nothing is getting better here, but there's more violence, crime, poverty, yeah.
The young, in particular, inclined to blame their struggles on colonialism.
Your grandmother loved the Queen, but you not so much.
I wouldn't say I don't like the Queen, no. I just would say the impact of I am looking and I'm facing my everyday reality is because of the impact of colonization. So that is what I'm looking at.
So much has changed since Princess Elizabeth first came here. In death, the Queen is now fueling new debates about the legacy of Britain's old African empire. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Cape Town.
Let's take a look now at the latest pictures here in London from the queues as thousands of people wait through the night to pay their final respects to Queen Elizabeth. Entry starts at Southwark Park with an almost 20-hour wait to get to the front. And officials are warning that temperatures will be cold, but as you can see, people there are not being deterred. And this is the scene inside Westminster Hall where people are still filing past to see the Queen lying in state. They are people of all ages taking a moment to pay a personal tribute. OK, with more on the weather, here's Helen Willits. Helen.
Rita, as you've already mentioned, yes, it is chilly out and about, isn't it, as we've heard at Westminster. And if you're up early in the morning, around dawn, a ground frost is expected, our first widely chilly night of the autumn. Temperatures in parts of Cumbria, Oxfordshire expected to get close to freezing. And it's because the wind is coming down from the north. It's been a brisk wind bringing that Arctic air today into eastern areas and still a few showers overnight tonight. These are the towns and cities. Earlier I showed you rural areas. So it will be quite surprising, I think, how chilly it'll be tomorrow morning. And if you are heading into London, indeed through the weekend, it'll be a little cooler than average by day and certainly so by night, but largely dry on balance. We do still have a few showers though for eastern England, the north and east of Scotland here. That breeze will continue to ease away. It's more likely that we'll see some patchy fog across Northern Ireland, so not quite as chilly here as last night, but some fine sunshine tomorrow. A bit more cloud across Scotland, temperatures on a par with those of today, so feeling pleasant as the winds start to ease, particularly so near the North Sea coast. And then tomorrow night, because we're introducing more cloud tomorrow across Scotland and the north and a few showers, the way will be more cloud tomorrow night, so it won't be quite as chilly on Sunday morning. It means that we might have a bit more cloud on Sunday and also perhaps one or two more showers, northwestern parts of England and Wales, perhaps a few more back into East Anglia as well, and one or two for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But again, with the light winds, we might have some morning fog, but by the afternoon, into the mid to high teens. Then the high pressure does move in on Monday, so I think we'll pick up more of a fog problem as we go into the beginning of next week, even though there could be some around through the weekend as well. But again, just a bit more cloud around, a few showers. There is the outside chance for London of a shower on Monday, but I think on balance for most of us, the rain should stay away until Tuesday, Rita.
Thank you very much, Helen. And that is all from us here on the BBC News at 10. There's much more on all of today's main stories on the BBC website. Now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.